Jesse Hanson, it is so great to finally be having this conversation with you. I was just saying to you how I feel like it's been a long time coming. I shared with my listeners in previous episodes a little bit about my Atman experience, but I told them that I would be, diving more into it in a future episode. And now I'm finally going to be able to share that with them. But I do want to talk about, and I talk about this often in this podcast, is I share my experience with my own spiritual awakening process. And I would love for you to dive in a little bit about your own and what is awakening to you? What would be your definition of that?
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Alyssa. So awesome to be here. So grateful that we finally get to have this conversation and just appreciate all the work and the beauty that you're bringing into the world. And so keep doing it. And and yeah, and it's I think through your both of our collective awakening that this is what we're choosing to do with our time and our energy and our life. And so for me, this word Atman is the Sanskrit word that really symbolizes the process of awakening. It's not something we just do or we get it done. We're choosing to be in it. Another cool metaphor in other indigenous traditions is often called the Red Road, which is more of a Native American indigenous language, but it's very similar. It just means like I'm walking the red road or I'm walking the path of Atman is the same idea, is that I'm choosing to be more conscious and more awake is the current word that I'm using. So it's a great question. What does it really mean to me? It means brain heart coherence. It means living in a more embodied way, and so much, especially of all ancient cultures and the different traditions that they pass down to us that uh, give us some templates or some ideas of like how do we walk the red road, because the road that most of us are walking, and I'm guilty as charged as well, but very digitally addicted culture that we've created. Obviously, that's a more modern phenomenon that, for example, it's a majoritively disembodying experience to kind of have our mind and body connected into a device. And yet it's still a way that we build connection. And that's something else that the ancient way was showing. So I feel like awakening, having brain heart coherence, meaning walking as a multidimensional being, knowing that I am partly have a mind, but this mind is not all of who I am. And I also have a body. This body's not all of who I am. And I also have consciousness, or my ability to, be aware of things both within and beyond my body and my mind. And I feel like that to me is what, when I started to have my own path and work and all this, that's what I started to notice, is the more I kept clearing out my old trauma and looking at all the different places that, here's another easy way to say it, Alyssa, is, you know, stepping into the process of awakening means that I want to become conscious of why I do what I do, down from the food and substances I choose to put into my body to even like my breathing pattern, my relationship choices, food choices, all these little choices we make. A lot of us just do them. And I know what that's like too. And I still fall into that trap, even though I know all this stuff. But is that, to me, that's the awakening, is when it's like, whoa, I have the ability to realize why I'm doing what I'm doing, and ultimately being able to influence. I'd prefer to show up this way, and how good it feels in my body when I can hit that alignment.
And so, do you think that awakening is a choice, or is there usually like a catalyst in our lives that lead us to this path?
Both. I mean, it's definitely, even when there is a catalyst, often a rock bottom or a tough situation, a universal slap on the face of sorts, it often is a catalyst for people to say, whoa, I'm tired of this pattern. I'm tired of ending up feeling like this. And yet even then it's a choice. So I think you're right, that's the majorative. And I think there are other scenarios where people, for whatever reason, maybe they're inspired by a loved one, or some other person inspires them, and without a major crisis happening, they can choose to start doing the work. And yet I think that, the riches are richest when the switch is set to the shadow healing. And, in other words, like, I think there's probably even more benefit in awakening out of, lotuses grow out of the swamp, right?
And were there
So
any significant teachers on your path? What kind of led you? Where did you look for guidance? How did you become so self-aware and so conscious?
uh definitely going into the swamp. Definitely having a lot like relating to the challenges of my life in a way that I did end up in my early 20s in a period of substance abuse and just master escape artist in a very functional and pretty way, but no lying, it was my own way of not knowing how to process my own emotions. And ironically, my first primary teacher, and I would say the person that helped me begin my awakening, was a Native American teacher in places of all places, South Central Los Angeles, also known as Compton, which is where, first of all, like, I was a silly white guy driving in there with my Prius at the time. But yeah, she took me through much more embodied and ancient wisdom. It wasn't Dr. Jesse psychologist stuff. It was like sweat lodges and fasting and learning the power of meditation and prayer and mantra and all these elements. That's that, and I give thanks for her. She has recently transitioned. Srinatha Devi, Mataji, Chief White Eagle. She was known in many ways, but she was like a spiritual mother to me and really opened me up at a pretty young age, like 23. And since then, I've had many teachers and got more and more as moving through that wave into the more clinical, becoming Dr. Jesse became much more academic teachers and more traditional teachers. But I realized they were all singing the same song, all guiding me towards the same goal of embodiment and having more faith in my life.
They often say when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and that's definitely been true in my own life. And I think there comes this like pivotal moment in our lives when we actually realize that we are on this path. We start to, wake up more and be more conscious of our own, just our own patterns, our own traumas, like you were mentioning. And then it almost seems, I know I experienced this in my own life. I'm not sure if you have as well, but that just this guidance of like through synchronicity, just feeling like you are being like guided through whatever you call it, universe, God, creator, source. Could you share a little bit about that if that was your experience?
Yeah, that's what I meant in the closing of the last comment when I said the word faith. Is like having faith that if I just be vulnerable, open, be courageous to look inside of myself, the faith is that, yeah, the universe, God, spirit, Chuck E. Cheese, whatever you want to call it, is going to bring through that synchronistic moment. And in the quantum realm, we would also call that the law of attraction and the way electromagnetic frequencies work. So that's what I love about being a 2025 and onwards human, is that we finally have the science to keep up with the ancient wisdom. For so long, it was like, oh, that stuff's just woo woo and it's crazy. And it's like, actually, if you apply quantum physics and neuroscience to all this woo woo stuff, you actually realize, wow, it's actually the most advanced science that we know of right now, way beyond traditional third dimensional, more medical or simply physiological science. So it's, to me, that's how the faith happened. It's like I open my heart, be courageous. I often say universe favors courage, and courage is not the same as bravery. Courage is getting to lead with my heart. Bravery is like fighting, pushing through a fear, and there's some overlap for sure. But I feel like when courage happens, then the next blessing just comes in, even if it's a challenging one, even if it's something that my ego doesn't want to see. I can be like, oh, well, yeah, that is the next lesson I needed to learn. So to me, that's what you're describing. The synchronicity is faith, and it doesn't have to be tied to a religious deity. It can be, no problem. And yet it's also something I think is even outside the construct of religion.
Absolutely. And so you also had the opportunity to mentor under Gaber Mate. What was that like?
First of all, he would like us to recognize Gabor. He's
Gabor.
that Gabor, yes, Gabor Mate. Oh man, what a soul. I feel so honored. It's been a beautiful chance just to have him as a mentor and friend. And my first therapeutic psychedelic experience was with him in the jungle. And it just like opened me up so much to I think a more conscientious way of being involved in the ceremonies, and whether I'm receiving it or guiding it. And ultimately, it was Gabor who gave me the courage in 2019, when I had so many clients coming into my private practice office that were telling me the same thing. They had gone to do an ayahuasca retreat either in Costa Rica or Peru usually, and in the moment it seemed amazing, but as they've gotten back home, they're like, whoa, what's happened? And I can't regulate and I don't know what to do with all this. And I saw too much and all these things. And it was that phenomenon mixed with my time, especially at that point with Gabor. He gave me the courage and the faith to trust and have faith that if I just follow my heart, which was to, as a licensed professional, to start to speak up and speak out about the potency of ceremonial work, that it would be okay. Because of course I've been programmed to feel like you can't do that. You shouldn't do that. No, you're over here and this is over there. And it's like, no, actually they are all perfectly balanced and they marry each other quite well. And so, I owe him that nod of respect and gratitude that, he had already paved that path and made it easier for me to step in his footsteps. And so yeah, I love him very much and grateful for the way that he's impacted my journey
And
and
so
continue.
was that your introduction to plant medicines, working with Gabor?
No, I say that was like my first time in a highly professionalized therapeutic container. I had already experienced, I was in LA in my 20s, so you can toss a nickel and catch at least five, pseudo shamans serving ayahuasca. So it was everywhere. And I did try it once in an overall solid container, yet it wasn't deeply therapeutically held. It was overall safe. And I got something from it, but not much. And then I started to experiment with mushrooms not long after that. But again, in more recreational ways. I mean, it was a little more intentional, but still not therapeutic. So I'd had a few dips and dices with that energy, but even though this is now a huge part of my path, it wasn't something that I grew up doing all the time. It really started in my, mid 20s, and started kind of coming to a crescendo almost 20 years later now.
And maybe you don't have one, but is there a plant medicine that is your favorite to personally work with?
Yeah, I would have to say I think both for my own continued expansion and learning as well as with serving with others is definitely psilocybin. I just find it's like such a beautiful teacher and the right balance, especially as a psychologist and clinically trained and also indigenously trained and influenced service medicine server. Uh, as that comes together, I feel like psilocybin is the greatest potential of like opening up these new spaces for people and yet also still being able to reach them, still being able to guide and connect. uh, that being said, every person is different and every journey is different, and where some people go in psilocybin is where some people go on ayahuasca. And it's not so locked in, but I do find if I had to choose one, the psilocybin is just really potent for therapeutic and intentional use.
It's the only one I've actually tried. I've never tried ayahuasca yet. I haven't felt the calling to quite yet, maybe one day, but I'm quite comfortable working with psilocybin at the moment. So yeah, and
Nice.
I had obviously an incredible experience myself at Atman last summer. And so now you are leading retreats at Atman. How did this all evolve from like your clinical background to all of a sudden running retreats? Was this your vision all along, or were you kind of pulled and guided there?
Yeah, thanks. That's a cool curiosity. I had a private practice in a big city and making, overall great money as a therapist and a wait list. And in many ways, like I think, could have easily just sort of coasted on that. And yet I knew from my own healing experiences, some of which I've already opened up, some of which were ceremonial. I did also start doing clinically grounded psychotherapeutic deep dives, which could be like 3 to 7 day intensives without any plant sacraments, but just more focused work. So between those deep dives and all my indigenous ceremony that again didn't actually for many years didn't involve any plants other than like not non-psychedelic plants. There would be different sweet grass and sage, but those ceremonies were just as eye-opening as anything else. And it just made me realize that, wow, like the clinical hour is awesome and you can help people out at a weekly rhythm and it's got its purpose. But I humbly admitted to myself, I was like, but Jess, it, like in your own journey, you wouldn't be where you're at if you hadn't have done these deep dives, if you hadn't have chosen to immerse yourself more deeply in this as opposed to an hour here, an hour there. So that was the intelligence inside of me that ultimately, combined with the fact that I kept having so many clients come back saying they were like dysregulated from the way that these ceremonies are being held. And FYI, I don't think it has anything to do with the plants or ayahuasca particularly. It has to do with just, people not fully understanding how trauma gets reactivated in these things and not having the proper integration. And so that's what it was, Alyssa. It was just like, I'm crazy. By left brain standards, I'm crazy because like I'm doing well and I could just cruise. But I was like, no, I'm going to give all this up and take the leap of faith to come and live in Costa Rica. And I didn't even know when I moved here what exactly it was going to look like. But I just knew I wanted to create a sacred space where people could come and do the deeper work and really go way beyond what we can ever achieve in 1 hour, even one-on-one sessions. Even when there's a great therapist and a very willing, open, ready client, there's something about the immersion, there's something about the large or small group that brings up the next levels of the work.
Absolutely. And I love that you addressed that the plant medicine is not the problem. It's, the set and setting, the container, and also we're a very disembodied culture. And I even experienced it for myself, not with any type of psychedelic, but breath work. My first time doing breath work, I felt really called to do some type of this work just because I was really struggling at home, isolating myself, recovering from, addiction and a very like domestic violence situation. And so I decided to go to this breathwork ceremony, and I had a really intense experience where I felt like I lost control of my body. And afterwards, for about 2 weeks after, I started having like really intense flashbacks. And I also started just losing a lot of weight, experiencing severe insomnia. So I did start working with a somatic practitioner. It was really helpful. She really supported me in working through that. So it's so important to even mention these things. Like it's not the modality that's the problem. It's not the medicine that is the problem. It's just we're not preparing ourselves and not educating ourselves enough. And that was my issue. It was like I did not educate myself going into it and making sure that I had the proper support around me. And now obviously I approach it very, very differently. So having that experience obviously in Atman was just unbelievable because it is such a safe container. Like I felt so safe to do the work, so safe to be vulnerable. I know that's a fear for many people, is expressing vulnerability in a group of people like that. But when you're there and you just feel so connected to the people in your group that you're with, because like you're working closely with them for that whole week, like you're always together, and you just have this strong bond, and those fears just go away. They did for me. Like the fears that I went in with initially were gone by
Yeah.
a few days in. So yeah, you have an incredible team, and I just want to mention that. And yeah, I'm just so grateful for that experience.
Thank you, Alyssa. Yeah, such an honor to hold space for you and even us healers. We need to do the work. We need to take the time and space for ourselves too. So respect for that. I also respect your intelligence. This quick story you shared there, just the highlight of regardless of the body symptoms, your body was talking to you and saying something. And a lot of times people are just programmed to say, oh, well, I better get to the doctor and I better take more supplements and I better get a new pill or whatever it is. And so I respect the insight and wisdom in you that said, like, yeah, maybe I can check all that out to just see what my options are. But really, like, I need to look at my emotions. I need to look at how I'm holding on to certain things from my past. And so thank you for doing that. Thanks for being brave. And yeah, that's really the core of everything that I am sharing now with the world through this project called Atman, and through the process of Atman in myself and in others, the awakening is all things that I have tried, true tested on myself as the own best guinea pig. And in other words, I'm just simply sharing back what I've learned over the last 25 years on this path and hoping that it helps people as much as it helped me. And so far it seems to do that, part because I think there is a lot of wisdom in what I was taught and shown. And there's also a grace that I'm getting better at little by little of how that information is shared and transferred. And this is the perfect chance to highlight as we go deeper into this, Atman Awaken is the name of the retreat that you came to, is called Awaken, appropriately entitled. And is that, if you look at sort of the global market right now, Alyssa, of what's my option out there? I'm a random human X, Y, and Z that I want to awaken, but I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. I'm going to Google it. Okay, there's, I'm not going to say any other names, but there's some of the biggest competitors out there in terms of psychedelic services. And overall, that they're well intended and they're doing great work. However, to me, the big critique I have is that there is not enough focus on preparation and integration, and or what is there is still very cognitive and mostly around sort of group sharing, much like a sharing circle, which is great. I'm not against it. I'm just saying that's maybe only half of the equation. And the other half is all the stuff we were just talking about, the brain heart coherence, the embodiment, learning how to reactivate the neural networks that get reprogrammed during ceremony, for example. And just at a very sort of bird's eye view and looking in at a program, what does a program include? Often it's the very standardized now in the industry is 3 to 4, sometimes even 5, decently the option to have pretty heavy doses, if not encouraged to have heavy doses night after night or night every other night. And my critique is that here we are, Western culture, more is better. Just got to do more, got to get higher, got to get more expanded. And I actually did a research project 2 or 3 years ago with a team at Queen's University in Canada, private research that we looked at the ancient wisdom around ceremonial containers and structure. And there was nothing we could find that suggested that the ancient wisdom suggested to do so much ayahuasca so quickly in order. I'm not saying they didn't do it. I'm not saying that it maybe happened somewhere, but more what we uncovered and what matched with my own understanding was that these cultures were more embodied already. They're out hunting, gathering, and touching the earth and being in their bodies. So maybe doing ayahuasca once a year, it's like they were already in a place to relate to all of that in a much different way than coming out of the North American mindset, the rat race, the hyper left brain activity, money, all these pieces. So we want to escape that. We want to get blasted off and say, oh goodness, that was great. But my critique is that it's often too much for people too fast. And even if they have an amazing experience and they say, wow, at the end, it's often a week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months later when they get home that they're realizing, whoa, wow, that was just crazy and cool. And it was over there. And that's like a separate reality almost. Like I don't know how to bring that home to my daily life. It seems like unless I'm going to do ayahuasca every night, I don't know how to get there. Or even worse, and what I kept experiencing back in 2019 was people really struggling, really feeling like dysregulated, having body symptoms come up, which again is perfect. This is what gets opened up in ceremony, comes up to be healed. But if it's not educated that way and there's no integration, especially somatic integration, then what we've done is sort of ruffled the pot and shaken everything up and brought certain things to the surface. And yes, maybe some of those got cleared or expressed in ceremony, but others didn't. And that's what the person's wrestling with. So last quick point on this is just to say that's what I've witnessed, not saying it with any judgment. I'm saying it with, I question the efficacy as a clinician of like, okay, what are we doing in opening people so much without really empowering them? And I can tell you, as having run retreats and knowing the business model, it's a lot easier to just move people through group experiences over and over again, whether it's online, virtual, in person. You pay 1 to 2 facilitators to actually take the time and focus it takes to do the proper somatic integration with each guest. It's a time and money consuming process. And yet my argument is it's worth it. We have to find a way to restructure. All the energy goes into so many uh, heightened ceremonies, meaning with lots of ayahuasca or whatever it is, versus what we're sharing now at Atman. And what you got to go through was there was one peak experience that had to do with the sacraments and the highly altered states of consciousness. But we did so much work with each person individually in small groups and really helping each person understand. To me, it's quite simple. People talk about a bad trip. A bad trip just means, well, I'm uncovering things that I wasn't ready to see. But if I actually am given proper preparation, tools, techniques, approaches, then I'm going in being like, all right, I already know, I have a good sense at least of what's in here, and like I'm ready to face it. I have some ideas of how to work with that energy, those parts of me when they come up. And that's what we spend a lot of time on that. And that's what I think is really the single differentiating factor besides the awesomeness of my team. Thank you so much. But it's really about shifting the priorities and still honoring the ancient wisdom and honoring the ancient ceremonies, and yet also honoring modern neuroscience and trauma reprocessing and the understanding that our brain body are fully connected, and where just by sharing and saying words, we're not really going to get the full benefit of what these ceremonies can give us, you know? So yeah, I've said a lot. I'm going to take a breath.
We often lose our ability to be adaptable and to experience the full range of human emotions. And what I really loved about the experience was like all the different modalities and the different therapeutic approaches that you use, whether it was adventure therapy, embodiment classes, or doing some of the deeper emotional work. It really helped us develop that range, even going into ceremony. And you look at children and it's like they go from like crying, screaming to all of a sudden laughing and playing, and we've lost that ability to do that just because it's not culturally acceptable. And so I really felt that I was able to really tap into that, and just being able to give myself that permission to express myself sober in front of a group of people prior to doing any type of plant medicine, or psychedelic therapy, right? Like doing that first, and then you felt more free. I felt really empowering. I feel confident when I'm able to express those parts of myself. We can have these insecurities going into it and thinking that we're not going to be able to feel comfortable to express, but you really do, because the container is so safe and everyone's there with you. And so just being able to really dive in and experience the range of like all emotions, prior to going into it, really set me up, I felt, for success. And also just feeling grounded in my body. So it wasn't like this disconnected, dissociated, going into all these different ranges of like expression and emotion. Like it was very grounded and it felt really embodied. And so it was really supportive. So well done for sure.
Thank you. Thanks for highlighting all that. And yeah, you said it beautifully. It's like, well, I've already kind of opened up and done some weird or crazy things sober. So what's the big deal if I do it in a few days on mushrooms? And so I love that. And that's deep preparation in the sense of like, all right, I have a sense of already what might come up. And ironically, what I see is when myself or others take the time to do focused prep work ahead of time, then I don't have to go as far into the shadow or deal with as much hard teachings from the ceremonial elements as when and then I can just spend more of the adventure learning and getting that clearing, so it's almost like doing that work ahead of time helps to shift how the ceremony actually happens. And you reminded me of another key differentiating factor. I would say one is just the way it looks on paper. Again, we're coming from this northern mindset, more is better. If I'm going to spend $5,000, I got to get as much out of this as I can. This one has this one three. Oh wait, that one does four. Oh God, that one does five. I'm going there. More is not better in this instance, and very rarely is it. But is that, even though on paper you see one larger ceremony, other little mini different styles of ceremonies, I would argue like you're getting so much more value out of it because you're actually getting focused time. And what that took to create what we went through together was, as a facilitator, as a director of the program, I had to say, wait a second, more is not better. I want people to actually get long lasting change from this. So we're going to, as facilitation team, work harder. Again, it's a lot easier to just do psychoeducation and sharing groups in a large group. It takes a lot more presence and facilitation to really work with each person individually in that formatting, to allow that each person to get opened up deeper, right? And then, like you said, it makes the connection feel even stronger before we even put any sacraments in us. And oftentimes there's within 24 to 48 hours of arriving, people are already deep in the journey space, which again, I'm not saying it's wrong, Alyssa. And I do think that for some people out there that are really well processed, self-regulated, very experienced with this, just going and do three ayahuasca ceremonies or mushroom ceremonies back to back to back can have a lot of value because I know how to work with it. But I think that, and what we're working on with Atman is building a place that is for everyone, not just for the high spiritual seekers or the people that have done this 1,000 times. It's like the ability to meet people where they're at. And I think that's the other key programming, is that you're not going to go to this ayahuasca center if you're not going to drink ayahuasca. We actually have people that come through our program that I always encourage everyone. You're never going to be forced to do anything. You're going to get intelligence and education on what dosage would probably be a great way to challenge you. But ultimately, you get to choose if you even take anything. And usually every retreat, there's at least one person that either goes very low dose or doesn't even take anything, and they still have an amazing day because they're being guided, they're doing the work, and then just spending a 5 to 6 hour window of like self-reflection and guidance on how to move what's stuck inside of us out is powerful, whether we put the plants in us or not. And so that's another key differentiator. And I think you're doing a great job of extracting what some of the fears are that some of our listeners might be going through, and some of the fears that, especially for the majorative part of our planet right now, which is not the hippies or the barefooted ones running through the land, having these ceremonies all the time. I think there's a lot of people out there that are very curious about this, and yet they're scared that it's going to be too much. It's going to, I don't want to see what actually happened in my childhood. I don't want to. And the programming we've built and continue to polish allows for that. Like, we'll meet you right where you're at. We're going to give you opportunities and say, hey, if you want to go to the next level of awareness, of awake, you can, but it's also okay. And you'll be respected to stay where you're at. And that's okay too. We'll work with, like, how do you move forwards from within that, and a retreat like this that offers psychedelic experiences, and yet it's not mandated, and yet you would still have an amazing time, even if you didn't take anything, because the whole retreat is not just about, I'm not just sitting there for 3 or 4 nights watching everyone else around me purge and go through their stuff. I'm still very much a part of all the same processes as them. So I admit, as someone that, has been trained clinically and also knows the ancient wisdom, to me, this is the compromise. This is that place where, how do you make it feel welcoming to people that are curious, but scared, understandably, because it's true. If you don't have the prep work and you just go and do this stuff, it can be very scary, and it can be re-traumatizing, you know?
Well, that was my
So,
first time ever doing psilocybin in ceremony with other people, first time ever. And I had been microdosing before, and I had done larger doses. I would never suggest for people to do that on their own. I was terrified to do it in ceremony, like prior 2 years ago. And so I was like slowly building myself up to that by going to breathwork ceremonies. And yeah, I felt like there was definitely some hesitation and some fear going into it, but completely gone now after that experience. I'm so grateful. And can you share with us a little bit about the other kind of modalities that you incorporate? Uh, is there family constellations work, IFS work? Like, what else do you use?
yeah, yeah. It's kind of our own amalgamation of many, but yes, internal family systems work is definitely influencing it. In IFS, as it's known, is part of a larger body of psychological framework called parts work, or structural dissociation. And there are many different models outside of IFS that they're all roads lead to Rome. It's basically the intelligence that, per neuroscience, per ancient wisdom, per modern psychology, we have this one body, and yet we have very many parts of self that live inside this body. Much like, to Dick Schwartz's compliments, and his book is amazing, it is like having a little family inside of ourself. And so that's a huge piece, and that works so well with psychedelics and ceremony and altered states of consciousness, because that's a simplified way of saying what happens is, often it's a parts party, and all these different parts are just coming up to be seen and to be remembered and to be acknowledged for the first time in some cases. So parts work is a heavy influence. Constellation therapy, which in a nutshell is basically using human relational field, the way we are in space with each other, and we mirror neuron each other, and we reflect things back to each other, using that within the group to help extract and sort of see the deeper themes in people's stories. Their constellation is like, my mom was like this and my dad was like this, and okay, we're going to set this up and set that up and see it all from a higher perspective. That's huge. Sensory motor psychotherapy, the principles of sequencing trapped energy, releasing, I call it trauma residue. For every trauma I harbor, there's contraction patterns in my neuromuscular system that create tension on organs and create biochemical cocktails. And So helping people understand sensory motor work and how to sequence the energy is a big piece of what we do and integrate into that. Obviously, things like breath work and play, nature adventures. We have, we're continually right now, we're in between transitioning how we're going to build our space, but cold plunges and saunas, those kind of elements are just great tools to help open all of that. And ultimately, yeah, I think that the key thread throughout the week, this is, we're talking about the week-long experience, but is embodiment. You know, there's just, that's, if the core clinical theme is embodiment, then we have all these different sort of tools and approaches that we use to help keep encouraging that. And I've said it before in other talks I've given, like, psychedelics, these plant sacraments we put in us, they are the master somatic teachers. They are the master somatic therapists. And that's what happens when we take them and we choose to let go and breathe and surrender to it. Basically, in a nutshell, people start to sequence. They start to let go of the trapped energy because the controller, judge, socially programmed, appropriate part is no longer running the show, right?
And
So it's a
so,
whole hodgepodge. It's a whole hodgepodge of stuff, but it's continually evolving. But yeah, those are some of the clinical frameworks. And then the last quick thing I'll say, Alyssa, is that, yeah, the indigenous frameworks, which was my earliest healing moments for me, was I went through that path first and then became a clinician. Oftentimes people go through clinical and realize, okay, this is great and I'm really smart and I've got a lot of heady techniques, but I don't really know what to do with all this stuff. And they end up going into either somatics or shamanic elements. I feel so blessed that I got that first and young. And so I just also honor that all of those elements of creating ceremony doesn't have to be all these strange things. Ceremony just means like creating sacredness, right? It means like doing something with intention and sacredness, and that is also brought into everything we do in the awaken experience. Is that sort of indigenous wisdom. We choose to make it sacred or not, you know.
well, and
Yeah.
so after having this experience, if someone were to come to the retreat, like what can they expect afterwards? What type of support will they have afterwards? What will be available to them? What can they expect to come like up for them, like in their lives? I know many people are scared from conversations that I've had of, is this going to change my entire life when I get back from an experience like this?
Yeah, so great. I mean, integration really is the hard work. The ceremonies can be tough. They can also be really fun. The deep dives, the week long, it's often like pretty amazing. You're getting, so many needs met and taken care of in a way. It's when that all ends and the bubble pops and here we are back in life. And yeah, I often say that this is the Achilles heel of the industry, is that no one, not even myself, I was running small private boutique retreats for 2.5 years before starting this project. And I couldn't keep up with every client and seeing them weekly and doing these integration sessions. Of course, I onboard more people to help, but even that, it's a difficult challenge we all face, society as well as the providers of these retreats. And so I first want to just own the shadow before we talk about the light. The shadow is like, it's not there right now. Hardly anyone, if anyone, is really doing that. And even partly because it's a big challenge. And also, like I named earlier, providing focused, individualized one-on-one care is a much more time-consuming, pricey endeavor than gathering groups and moving them through in group processes. So there's that variable that has to do with it. But what I'm working on right now is, first of all, like in the sort of the bundled compensation for coming to the experience, it includes 4 group integration sessions afterwards. And then something else that I realize is only going to last as we sort of launch later this year into the first year of operations. But right now, I have my whole clinical team that helps me run the retreats. They're all available for one-on-one counseling, coaching, therapeutic work afterwards. And so that's a unique offering that oftentimes, if organizations do have this, that work is done by someone different than the people that were actually there with them in the moment, moving through everything. And inevitably, that will only be scalable to so far. So I'm also working with a couple different partners right now to create a more advanced digital platform that not only makes it easier to access those services that are aligned. The other main challenge I hear so much is like, well, great, I went and did this, but I went back to my talk therapist and they want to do CBT on the aliens or whatever it is. And it doesn't quite fit anymore. And so that's the other challenge. It's not just about finding a therapist, it's about finding someone that is trained somatically and trained in ceremony to really be able to properly integrate someone. So that's what I'm working on, is making that group, that tribe, if you will, and also just amplifying the ability of community of other like-minded folks that have gone through it, even if they weren't in my retreat, but they went through the same experience, to then start to be able to host and have more, I guess it would be like the wider student body of participants that can connect and support each other. So that's what I'm working on. It's not fully manifested yet at this exact moment. And for what's coming up in April, I have the opportunity to connect people directly with the facilitators themselves and continue that work. And it's a never-ending process. The work's never done, but there are upgrades. And if we don't claim our upgrades and work to embody them, then we're just looping or sliding backwards. And that's the main thing, is people feel like, oh, I put all this money, time into a 7-day thing, and like I should be fixed, I should be done. No, like you just came and got all the upgrades, you came and got all the rewiring. Now you've got to keep it alive. And the number one variable or challenge I see is not about meditation or staying eating healthy or disciplining, journaling or something. It's that people have deep awarenesses around relationships in their current day life that are out of balance, and they, to really heal or to move forward with what they are shown in a retreat or in a ceremony, is very tough conversations. And people go back and they don't want to have those conversations. And so it's that lack of bringing my authentic truth into my current life that actually sets people back. It's not because they didn't do enough meditating, and meditation, all those other obvious sort of integration tools, those help. But the number one pitfall I see, and I admit it too for myself, it's not easy. It's not easy to go back and speak truth to your mom or whoever it is about what you just learned. But it's that truth speaking that I argue is what makes the biggest difference, of where I see people who come and do this experience and they just keep rising and they just keep gaining from what they've seen. Last quick thought on this, Alyssa, is that one of my teachers helped me realize is like looking back at ourselves, former selves, whatever age it was, and we see something we did that was like, oh, why did I do that? Like, man, didn't I see that guy was a jerk? It's like, wait a second, at that moment, I didn't have the upgrades. I didn't see what I see now. So yes, see it and recognize how it was out of alignment, but don't shame, don't put so much harshness on, like, ah, and yet we can definitely get mad at ourselves and or hold accountable. Now that we've got this upgrade, I need to put it to use. Now that I was shown what I was shown through the relational therapy, through the ceremony, through the nature adventure we did, I see it now. If I go back home and I just keep my mouth shut, then I ought to be mad at myself or call myself out, be like, wait, but now you do see it. And if you, I'm talking to myself, if I don't speak this, this is going to just repeat. I'm just going to start drinking again. I'm just going to start vegging out, porn, whatever our poison is, will start to seep back in. Not because it didn't work and not because we're not amazing. It's because we're still learning that courage to speak our truth and let our life unfold, right? As opposed to thinking I can control the outcome. If I don't say this, everything will be good. It'll be fine. It'll be like back to normal, right? It's BS.
Well, insights are quick, transformation takes time. And I find the journey after attending like ceremony like this very similar to my journey starting the 12 steps, because I had a spiritual awakening when I got sober. It's actually how I got sober, had a white light experience. But having an experience like that, it shines light on all your shadows. So you feel called, like you have to get this stuff off your chest, but also realizing that just because you had this heightened awareness and this spiritual experience, not other people are at that level and are going to be able to receive it. So it's always safe to give yourself some space just to integrate that experience first, sit with it, And of course, you want to do something with it, but it doesn't have to be done right away. And I think often we come back from these experiences, think that we need to make all these changes right away. But I mean, even in recovery, it's often suggested like, don't make any big changes in recovery because you are going to see everything that's wrong in your life initially. So take some time to adjust to that, and then decide what you need to change and what needs to be said.
Well said. Couldn't agree more, you know. And yeah, that's it. It's just letting ourselves get used to that and feeling that new sense of self. And then it's a much more grounded way to have those conversations. Right.
Well, thank you. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you think that we should touch on?
I am going to repeat this message until I get tired of repeating it. We are the medicine, within the context of everything we've talked about. There's so much unconscious giving our power away as we talk about psychedelic medicines, plant medicines. They are sacraments. They're offering themselves so that we can awaken. We are the medicine. Everything they're showing us, everything they're unlocking is already there, whether it's beautiful and heavenly or scary and hellish. It's already within us. And so that's my invitation for any listeners that are willing to try it on as they continue to explore this. And I know I'm an anomaly and an outlier in all the materials and marketing and propaganda right now of this industry all talk about plant medicines. And it's just to say, okay, but how different is that from saying this pill is going to fix me? And I've been seeing a few other voices on Instagram lately of people saying like, actually, here's what ayahuasca did not do for me, or mushrooms, it doesn't matter, but it's like sort of admitting like it didn't just magically heal me. It's not the medicine. It is a friend, an ally, a teacher, a guide, a sacrifice, a sacrament, but it's really not it's only a medicine as much as we want to stay in the same construct that's gotten us to this point of society, which is thinking that something outside of me is going to fix me. It's not. Now, can things from outside of us help us, guide us, support us? Heck yeah. And can that be humans and plants and animals? Yeah. You know, but this idea that, you know, yeah, I want to encourage more people to, and it's not a versus. It's not like if I take back my power and say I am the medicine, doesn't mean that I don't love, respect, or honor the plants. For me, it lets me honor them even more because I'm now not looking at them as like a crutch or a fix me or a maybe you're going to save me if I could just sneak away and do this. Have the insight. It's like, no, this insight's already in me. And if I choose to engage with you, please help me find it, you know? So
Well,
I think that's the only thing that I would want to say today. And otherwise, yeah, great to share all this with you today and happy to keep just letting this journey unfold, Alyssa.
I so appreciate this conversation. I think this is going to be so helpful for anyone who is on the fence or feels pulled in different directions, because they hear some people say that ayahuasca destroyed or psilocybin destroyed their nervous system, or thinking about going to other retreat centers where they're doing back-to-back ceremonies. So I think this is going to be a really great episode for people to listen to, just to help them unravel some of these fears that they might have going into it. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks again for all the great work you're doing. And as they say down here in Costa, pura vida, may we have a pure life.